proceed with the special meeting. It's a special meeting, November 25th, 2019, 7 p.m. And call for motion to approve or amend the agenda as presented.
I motion we approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, any comments? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Mayor Rainville, you are up first on RCA.
Mr. Mayor, I move to rescind my RCA. And the reason I didn't do it during the agenda is because there might be some discussion on it. And the reason for rescinding it is that I've learned that there's been subsequent conversations with the city clerk, the mayor, and the residents, which hopefully should put to rest the issues that were occurring at Morton Farms. And I would invite the city clerk and our mayor to expand on what those conversations were. But I would rescind my motion, or my RCA.
All right. I'll address what I know, and Lori, if you have anything else you want to add, then you can fill them in. Have anybody heard from residents up there other than Mary's RCA? Anybody get called? Mary and I both got called by residents in the area that were concerned with people hunting in parkland there and using ATVs on the trails there. And the short version of it is, for whatever reason, our signage at the trailhead where the small parking lot is there in Morton Farm has disappeared. If you walk the trails, you do see old Burns Township signs that say no hunting or no motorized vehicles. It doesn't technically say it's a park. So we had a conversation with the residents who had complained, met them up there, and the agreement was, and I think, Lori, you were already working on signage. So Lori had already been working with Joe and working on signage. Sheriff was involved because people had complained to the sheriff, and basically we need to say it's a park, and then our park rules apply. Hunting rules and now then conform with the DNR rules, except in parkland. So it will be designated a park at the trailhead. The gates will be secured in a way that ATVs can't go through there. And the residents have had conversations. It's one of the things we want to do, residents getting together with residents. And there was a little animosity to begin with, but cooler heads prevailed. And the residents that were new there were informed that this is not an all-terrain area, and it's not a hunting area. And so I think the residents did a good job eventually of working it out amongst themselves. Once they realized that Lori and the staff were already working on the other remedies to make sure the sheriff knew it was a park, I think everybody was satisfied. So with the signage, with the securing the gates in a way that Joe can get through but the ATVs can't, we'll take care of it.
Okay.
So,
Mayor, council members, Joe Blaze and I went out this morning to get a good look at the entrance and what the situation is out there. Invited a couple residents to come out if they'd like to, but I think they were working or they didn't get back to me. But I followed up with one of the two today, and the area is pretty wet back there, so they're not able to do anything maintenance on the trail right now until it dries up. So in the spring they will do some more maintenance on there for better walking, but to secure the gates and the signage. And then I also contacted the sheriff's department and let them know that that is a city park, not DNR property, because they weren't aware. So they told a resident that they would need to follow the DNR guidelines for hunting, but didn't mention that this is a city park though. And now the sheriff's department is aware it's a city park. Our signage will state that also.
Good.
So I think that one seems to be taken care of. If not, I'm sure a resident will call and let us know. All right. Next, discussion on the Ramsey Now Then Fire Department JPA agreement. Can't we bring any numbers for the, have they council seen the numbers? No. Okay. Yeah. I was thinking about it afterwards. So the fire protection, or the fire board met last Wednesday. And we've been asking for a formula by which we could discuss what our cost would be, should we stay in a JPA with Ramsey. So this all started last spring, late spring, early summer, when we discussed the JPA as it stands, and Ramsey felt that they were subsidizing now then the way it was structured. We had fixed rates over a period of 13 years. Our rates weren't going up, their costs were going up. So they started evaluating what their total costs were, and the short version of it is we asked for a formula that was repeatable, that would allow adjustment to the rates at an equitable manner, that we could see what that might cost now then. And then now then would decide, should we continue with the JPA with Ramsey? Should we look at a JPA with another city, or should we consider forming our own fire department? We didn't get those numbers, and then there were, the emergency meeting or the special meeting we had in October, where the fire department then filed in at the end of our meeting and expressed that they were shocked that we would be separating. Ramsey was prepared at that time to go to their council and vote on separation. The joint powers agreement, the JPA that we have right now, has a 2-year out clause. So once either party says we want out of this, there's a transition period of up to 2 years, not to exceed 2 years. Most people, once you decide you want out, you want to transition sooner than that. If Ramsey continued to believe they wanted out of this, they need to make that decision here in December, because the 2 years goes to the end of the year, 2 years after you announce it. So if they announced it by December 31st this year, it'd have to be done by December 31st of 2021. If they wait until January to announce it, then it's December 31st, 2022. And so they're anxious to make a decision now. They have one more council meeting. They have two, one tomorrow night and one on December 10th, I believe it is. So they're anxious to make a decision. So at our last meeting on Wednesday, they brought us numbers. They started the conversation with it's a very large number. And then they gave us this paper, and this paper says, in a nutshell, total finance, IT, administration, and fire services provided now then is $162,800. Additional cost, hard costs that are repeatable, is another $2,855. So grand total of all costs is $165,658, the way they figure it. That's based on a funding share formula where we use, based on the formula that we asked them to come up with. We are responsible for 16.9% of the cost. They are responsible for the other 83.1%. It's a big number. That does not include the operating costs we already have in our budget. So that doesn't include workers' comp. Does not include the relief association, and then any operating cost for our building. So, what Ramsey would like to know is, would we like to continue having this discussion, and can we afford it? My initial discussion with them was, we'd like to continue the discussion, if they're interested. We're not certain that all of Ramsey is united on doing this. When the council first decided they were going to withdraw before they met with the firefighters, we were paying about $40,000 a year in administrative cost.
I believe so, around there, yep.
And at that rate, they felt they were subsidizing Now Then. The residents in Ramsey were subsidizing Now Then for fire services, and that wasn't acceptable. When this number came back, a couple of their council members on the fire board said that's a different number. Their administrator also said if we take this back to the council, that's certainly different than $40,000, $165,000. Don't know if it'll change anybody's mind or not. But they're asking us to indicate whether we find this approximate number acceptable. We did say the number's too high, and we could go back and sharpen pencils and revisit it. But before we do that, we need to know that Ramsey still wants to do it, because there's no point in negotiating over something that's not going to happen anyway. So what we need to do tonight is decide an action on our part that we can communicate to Ramsey for their meeting tomorrow night. We have initiated conversations with 3 cities, Oak Grove, St. Francis, and Elk River, about their interest in pursuing a JPA. All 3 of them have expressed that they would be interested, but there's been no conversation beyond that. Am I correct, Lori?
Correct.
So they're all 3 interested. A question came up to by the Ramsey Fire Department, the firefighters. If 3 other cities are interested, why isn't Ramsey? And we don't have an answer to that yet. So there's some indication that Ramsey doesn't want it. And so the other option is to form our own fire department. And that's a realistic option. We would have to identify what the cost would be and then compare it to this and see. We believe that initially, without having hard facts in front of us, it would be a lower number than this, but we would have to do research. But before we asked, as a council, asked staff to do that research, we need to know if this is even realistic with Ramsey. If we go back and say, the number's a little high, but it's something we can work with, and we do have the money in our budget for it, we don't know when they would expect that to be. Would that be something in 2020? We've already set our budget for 2020. Something else would have to be moved to pay a portion of this. Do we ramp up? None of those details have been talked about. Is it something we jump right into and pay this much in a year, or is it something that we phase into over a couple of years? So I expressed at the fire board meeting that, in my opinion, the ball was in Ramsey's court. They need to take it back to their council and say, if we were somewhere near this number, would you be interested in continuing with Now Then? My personal opinion that is probably not, but council will have their discussion tomorrow. So the question to our council is, what message do we want to send to Ramsey, knowing that the number is going to be high? Knowing that a new JPA with another city is going to be higher than anything we've been paying to date. And our own costs would obviously increase over what we were paying Ramsey if we formed our own fire department. So how do we want to express ourselves to Ramsey? And my recommendation is that we understand these numbers. Dan did a quick calculation at the fire board meeting where he thought it was something more realistic. I think there's a middle ground between the number Dan came up with and here, because they want some compensation for burdened costs. So right here they have people's salaries times 2.3% for their burden.
2.3, Mr. Mayor.
Huh?
Not 2.3%.
Or 2.3.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. 2.3. So makes these numbers pretty high. We think there's a middle ground somewhere that could be discussed if they're interested. The question is, before we go too far down the road with alternatives, how do we want to communicate to Ramsey? And then secondarily, what direction do we want to give to staff so that if we need to start looking at something else, they're not wasting their time, but they can get going on.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Green.
would it be your opinion to make it as, if there were a transition, to make it quick, or to try and make a transition over a period of a year? What do you think would benefit the city the best if we did?
Ramsey would like it to be as soon as possible, though they have stated numerous times they're not going to do anything that jeopardizes the safety of the residents of Nowland. So it will take what it takes. If we form our own fire department, we have to evaluate what that does to staffing, because there's certain administrative costs and time that will be required. So we have to evaluate a number of things. They have said they will work with us. Their issue right now is to make a decision before the end of December, and preferably before December 10th, or by December 10th. So if we are separating, they can at least get the clock started, so that we have a dead end on it, a sunset on it. And then they would like to proceed as quickly as possible after that, but it's dependent on what we can do, researching our own department or JPA's.
Mr. Mayor, so if we were to make our own department, I think a year transition to allow us to get to the next budget cycle, to where we could build that into the next budget, being that this one's starting to firm up. Maybe if we said,
But we can't raise this one, this is as much as we can get this.
that's what I'm saying, so we wait until the next.
Yeah, and I
cycle.
think that,
And
we
then-
won't set that, we'll certainly target that, but it really would be dependent on what it takes to evaluate, and then, what it would take to hire a chief, evaluate where our station is and where our equipment should be located, and then, typically, right now, all of our firefighters are employees of Ramsey. So we would have to transition that. We also would have to work with the state legislature on the relief funds, because there would have to be legislative involvement in transitioning what funds they have built up in the Ramsey department, so that they didn't lose any of their relief money, their pension.
Let's say if we did a JPA with Elk River, would they then become employees of Nowland City, or would they become employees of the
Depends on how you
city?
structure the JPA.
Because if we were moving in the direction of them becoming employees of Nowland, that would be, to me, at a direction toward getting our own fire department.
I think that the discussion we've had at the board level is that, in a more traditional JPA, they become employees of the board. Because that's one of the problems we have right now. Everybody is an employee of Ramsey, and the fire chief is an employee of Ramsey. So he's got a department over there, they've got completely different cities. They're 5 times our size, they have 2 major highways, 2 rivers, busy railroad tracks running right through the middle of town. So it's a headache to go from that type of setup to also managing the issues that arise in Nowland. And so we would look at the structure, the way the JPA is structured, we would have to identify the chief would answer to a board rather than to 2 councils, most likely. Again, we haven't investigated this a lot, but there has to be something that allows them to be focused, and then the board to bring information from the councils. Answering to 2 completely different councils is a challenge. We have completely different issues than Ramsey does.
Mr. Mayor, I got 2 questions. One, you said you didn't think Ramsey probably was interested in continuing a relationship with us. Why do you think that?
There have been things said at various meetings. When this first came up before their council, they, in a workshop, determined 5 of their 7 council members decided they didn't want it anymore.
Okay.
So they've already indicated that once. Part of that was a completely different set of numbers. Part of that is it's a very challenging thing for staff. They've got a chief, they've got a fire marshal, and they've got a fire inspector. Those are full-time employees that again, completely different business structure down there,
Okay.
a residential structure. So there's indication that staff will do anything they're told to do. If they had a vote, they'd rather not do it.
The second question, if you would talk to the firefighters, do they tend to want to continue the relationship with Ramsey because they've developed a
Their initial
camaraderie?
response was very emotional, and they were very clear that they wanted to continue the relationship.
Because there's a camaraderie and a
There's a
feeling that
camaraderie,
they're
there's a
part of.
brotherhood, there's
Oh, yes, okay.
training, commonality of training, there's, after the meeting, talked with our captain, and he did say that the firefighters were coming around to whatever is best for the cities. They can make it work. So there's been some altering of the emotion that was there to begin with. We brought this. And as they said the night they came into our council meeting, if we don't go with Ramsey, they'd prefer their own department rather than another JPA. So, but again, we haven't pursued any of that until we got these numbers from Ramsey, which we got at the board meeting, and then until Ramsey makes a decision,
Okay.
likely tomorrow night.
Mr. Mayor?
Member Rainville?
Two questions. So you had said earlier the Ramsey Council had talked. Did that include the new council members that have been recently elected?
Yes.
It did, okay. All right.
And those two, and I don't know who's been most recently elected there,
Yeah, yeah.
but the two that were elected last fall are the fire board members.
But there have been two elections this year. When you say last fall, are you talking
A year ago.
a year ago? And I think there's been two elections this year.
One was just in November,
Yeah, I think there's been two.
and the other one was in the summer. The summer one would have been on the council.
Council at the time,
I don't
okay.
know who wasn't there. They said
Yeah, I
at the
don't know the
time,
names, okay.
5 of the 7, or 5 of the 6. So
Okay.
at the time, there was an open seat, so that person definitely wasn't there originally.
Okay, all right.
They were elected in this November. And I don't know who the 6th one that wasn't there. They didn't tell us who was in attendance, who wasn't.
Okay. Then my second question is in regards to the numbers that they provided to you last week. Was there any discussion, let's say we either go with the number they gave or a compromised number, was there discussion on when those numbers would start? Based on the fact that we've already set our budget for 2020 and they know that and we can't increase it?
Dan and Lori helped me out if you heard anything different. We did not go into details
No? Okay.
as to when, because the first question is if.
Yeah, okay,
There's no point in going into a lot of details if
okay.
not. My understanding at the meeting was they would like to see some of this money, if not all of it, the majority of it coming in 2020, if we could figure out how to adjust something in our budget. But it is understood that we set our budget and we can't raise the levy, we would have to jettison something else. Now, that being said, the question came up, if we just say yes to this, there was a question, can you actually do it? And it was in the context of, we thought we had enough money for a fire station addition, and we thought it was gonna come in around 100,000, and it came in at 160 to 170, and we didn't have money budgeted for it. So there was a frustration that there was a lot of energy put into it, and we didn't have the money. And so the caution to us was, don't say yes if you can't pay. We do have in our 2020 budget, $125,000 for fire station improvements. So we're not way far off from this. But again, Lori has not been tasked with finding the money, and I don't know that you've been,
I have not.
had any extra time to look and see what's under a rock somewhere. So we do know that there are funds for the fire station that, if we're not doing anything on the fire station, could be redirected to this for 1 year.
Mr.
But
Mayor, how long?
That's a whole different discussion. Councilmember Blake.
How long can we go without doing the improvements we have wanted directed toward the fire station? I mean, can we table that for years, or is that something that's pressing that needs to be done
It
as
would, it
soon
would be
as
nice to be
possible?
done, we've been wanting to do it for a long time, but we have a building here that could function for meetings. There are things we could do it, and if we're going to consider our own fire department, I don't want to pay anything more to Ramsey other than what the contract says, because we'll use those funds for evaluating our current building.
Okay.
The building we have was convenient because it was our old maintenance building. And so it was picked because it was the old maintenance building, and the assumption was this downtown area would increase with buildings. So it wasn't that out of the question to have a fire station right there. It's not ideally located because it's not near our heavier concentration of residences. And, you know, in Ramsey, their station two, their response time is really quick because all the firefighters live approximate to the station.
Okay,
Our firefighters come from all over the city to this area and then go back out to the residential area. So we would evaluate where it's best to house the equipment. Does this continue to be it? So we wouldn't want to use any more funds than we had to if we're going to be evaluating. As far as this one, adding on to it, I think what we intended there, it was nice to get the turnout gear out of the back of the trucks, but it's not unusual for departments our size to have a configuration like we have.
okay,
If meetings need to be had and that isn't comfortable, we've got this building and we've got a basement here that could be remodeled or purposed for that.
okay.
So that is not a drop dead issue there.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Bryan.
Yeah, as the mayor said, this is just a rough number. I still think there's two things that still need to be worked on if we're gonna continue with this. Are those numbers, the factors in there correct? The other thing is that staffing level set up where it works best for both cities? Where maybe we don't necessarily interact directly with the chief. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. Or there's a deputy chief that the now then part would work with directly so that it frees up time. But those are all the details that aren't necessarily ironed in here. Maybe there's other pieces of the model that we could theoretically possibly take on so we wouldn't have to have Ramsey do.
Okay.
Those types of things that's where this is still in my opinion, if we're putting the time and effort into reworking the JPA, it's still in draft mode because we need to make sure that if we're gonna redo it, let's do it right instead of having to redo it again in a couple years because we missed something, so.
And that's the unfortunate thing is at the fire board meeting, we didn't have any of these numbers before the meeting. Their council did, their representative did get them before the meeting. So they had some idea what they were talking about. So we didn't get to ask those types of questions. There's a number on here, 26,500 for a fire inspector. It's possible, I don't know how often, if anything's ever been inspected now then. But we have an opportunity to discuss building officials that do fire inspections. So, as Councilmember Bryan said, there's some numbers in here that could be fine-tuned. If you can knock 20,000 off here and 10,000 off there and say what's realistic, that's what I would have expected. Here's some numbers, think about it, have some questions, and then let's talk about the details. It goes back to your question. What makes you think they may not be interested? Well, if you're approaching it to saying, here's the numbers, let's talk, as opposed to here's the numbers, we're voting next week.
Take it or leave it.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
Another question too, and it's farther down the road, but the legislative action that we would need to have taken. How do other than the issue with the Met Council, we've never taken anything to the legislature. And I don't know if it's a bonding year this year, I don't know if it's a short session or a long, I just haven't looked at it to see if it's a short session or a long session.
There was some confusion when we met with the firefighters. Their research said it would take legislative action. Staff at Ramsey thought it wouldn't. Our last conversation at the fire board meeting is it would take legislative action. The role that I have with the League of Minnesota Cities positions me well to facilitate that. And it's been done before. Jerry, maybe you can speak to that process. Do you know anything about?
Sure, you want me to come up there?
Yeah, if you would, so you know.
Put your finger on the red light.
Yep, Jerry Strike, 19070 Licking Street. Related to the fire pension board, 2% of the insurance money for the geographical area that the fire department protects goes into a special fund. That fund in return comes back through the city revenues and is given to the Relief Association. The Relief Association is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization specifically for the firefighters to properly manage that money. Because the 2% money since the inception of the now then fire department has always gone to Ramsey. And they're Ramsey employees. You will likely need some sort of reverse that says both cities agree to extract that money from the account which has been collecting interest. And it would likely take a board vote of that 501c3 to give that money back so there's something left for the now then firefighters. So the other option is they are currently Ramsey employees. So those who are vested will always receive their money according to the bylaws of the Ramsey Relief Association. Those who are not currently vested, who we may be interested in getting money back for them to start off with, it could be in a position where that money isn't given. And we have, now then would have to start from scratch. But certainly the 2% money in now then is much different than the 2% insurance money in Ramsey. So the pension would be larger in Ramsey than it would be in now then.
And the investments, I imagine they have a much larger pool and they've been doing it for a long time.
So Ramsey's been around since 1988, and all that money's been going in, as well as whatever the city has contributed. The city can contribute on top of that. In the city that I'm familiar with, our council gives each firefighter $1,000 a year who are in good standing as a bonus into that account. And that over the years has put it in the multi-millions. So then, depending on the type of fund you're in, you get a piece of that pie or a share of that pie based on how many years you serve. And in return, it saves the city costs overall.
And right now, the vesting, are you familiar with the vesting in Ramsey?
The vesting I'm familiar with was 10 years in Ramsey. So unless you're 100% vested, or it would have been 40% I think at the time, at 10 years. And then at 20 years you hit 100% vesting. So unless they change that to 5 years, which is typical now because there's a huge retention issue. And keep in mind this 2% money was a retention tool by the legislature many years ago to keep those people who sort of or have swam the half of the lake. They didn't swim back, they kept swimming all the way to the end, and they would get that benefit. Plus they get an hourly rate. So firefighters get an hourly rate that's based off the council's recommendation. In Anoka County, the average hourly rate is probably, it's going up, but I would say it's probably $10 to $12 an hour. As high as $18 to $19 an hour because of the recruitment issue. So
And ours is currently higher than that.
so we're learning more and more it is about money. And people simply can't give their time to something such as this because it does demand a lot of time. You would want to talk to your local legislatures, or I would go right through the league, They have experts there. They can talk to Rose Hennessy and everyone and figure it out, what would need to be done. This is not a new issue. This is not a new issue. This is pretty common in Minnesota now. And sitting in a room, I want to make a clarification. There's shared services where we share services with one another, but we have our own fire department. And then there's a joint powers entity. A joint powers entity is a formal agreement amongst multiple cities to form a separate governing body, as the mayor said, which has its own board. So if you form a JPA, you no longer become the now then fire department or the Ramsey or the Elk River. You become whatever this fire district is considered. And then everything runs between this board.
Is that the way SPM is structured? Do you know?
SVM is a little different because they're a private entity. The chief is a CEO. So they are private, they are not public, but they have contracts with Blaine, Spring Lake Park, Mountain Sioux. The Centennial Fire District, the 3 cities on the east side at the time was Lima Lake, Circle Plains, Centerville. Those were a joint powers entity that was run by a board of 6 and then the 3 city administrators. And everything worked through the board, and then once the board made a decision, it went to the councils, and then the council representatives spread it to the city council members for a vote. It can be a little bit more complicated, but it does save costs on administrative because you're not paying 3 fire chiefs, you're not buying 3 ladder trucks, you're sort of broadening the boundaries based off those entities and buying trucks. And you'll save a lot more on capital equipment and big dollar value positions like a chief. I mean, a full-time chief is 6 figures, pretty easy in the metro area. You don't need that, obviously. Your chief will be a on-call or chief, and yet to be determined. But.
So there's a St. Francis, they decided to go full-time, their chief?
Last I talked to St. Francis, they did not, but that's been several weeks.
And Oak Grove is losing their chief January 1st, I believe.
My understanding lately is that St. Francis will be moving forward for at least a vote for a full-time chief. And they're growing so rapidly that it may make sense.
So Andover's losing their chief the 31st of January.
Yes.
So St. Francis will possibly be full-time. Oak Grove will have a new chief, Andover will have a new chief. Elk River, has it been 2 years yet?
Not yet.
They have, so there's a lot to be figured out. So back to Joel's question on timing, that little taste that we got from Jerry is part of all the things we have to figure out.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Greenberg.
the $125 for the improvement, $125,000 for the improvement. If we made a transition to where we would become our own fire department, it would make sense to have that money available for that time and to do it, apply that money when the transition came.
And those are the things that we can have the discussion on. Obviously, this year we've attempted to be more disciplined in our budgeting process. And so there will be a formal process, if we decide as a council to do that, to transition that. It makes sense, and that's where Lori will research, probably with Lori's help, and make recommendations there too. So there will need to be a lot of discussions depending on what Ramsey decides tomorrow night.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan.
I would say at least my opinion would be based on their meeting and at least knowing that there's potential for refining that agreement and narrowing down what's going on. I would say it's worth at least at this time telling Ramsey, hey, let's, you know, at least continue negotiations and see what's going on, and if we need to sharpen the pencil and talk about staffing and those kind of things and see what the actual number would turn into.
So one other thing that, from the meeting the other night, so we looked at a fair amount of the cost here, and about 150,000 at least can be considered fixed burdened cost for Ramsey. So when they first, 2 months ago, discussed it as a council, and we were paying about 40,000 administrative fees, it didn't make sense to them. You know, we were getting a bargain, they were paying extra for all these costs that we weren't sharing of it. When their administrator looked at this and we discussed the fact that, you know, 150 to 160,000 is fixed cost, that we would be absorbing, you know, depending on where we settled, what number we settled on, whatever that fixed cost is, that's not going to the residents. So their first impression was, if we're subsidizing now, then that's not good for our residents. We can't go to our residents and say, you're paying extra taxes to help now then out.
Right.
So their concern was, maybe the firefighters want this, but we really have to think about our residents first. Subsequently, when we reminded them that that's fixed cost that we would be picking up, if we don't, those people are still there. All that, you know, 17% of their salary that we're paying, burden salary, and like I said, that's about $150,000, they're still gonna have. So does that make sense to their residents to say, well, now we have to take it all, or we could have shared some of it with Nowville? So that's why they said it's a different discussion when back to council saying, we're gonna have all this burden cost without anybody helping us. It doesn't, because Nowville goes away, that doesn't go away, they still have to pay it. And it may change the conversation, we don't know. But I agree with Councilmember Bryan, and we have not had the discussion with Lori to say, where's the money coming from? Other than, if we needed to pay something this year, we do have designated money for a building. So if they were to continue in, with the JPA being modified, and there's a number of things. Right now, our trucks go to Ramsey, they pay us. Their trucks come up here, we pay them. Those are types of things that would likely disappear in a new agreement. If we went to a true JPA and structured a board, that would likely take care of some of the headaches we currently have right now. But I would agree with Councilmember Bryan. We say we have money to pay our fair share, depending on what that is. We would like to continue investigating it. And then Ramsey has to decide if they are in agreement with that too.
Mr. Mayor?
So let's make it into a motion. Let me ask Lori, before we do that, are you in agreement with, we aren't cash strapped because of that fund we set aside for the fire station? I mean, we don't have 165,000 sitting here, but
Correct.
we do have 125 we set aside for the fire station. Should we have to put good faith money towards a joint powers agreement, we have something without having to make other major adjustments to our budget.
Mayor and council members, we would just need to use that money that we do have set aside and reallocate it for more of an emergency type of a situation to get us through what we need to get through. for
So if we were to say to Ramsey, we would like to proceed, continue discussion, we can do that in good faith that we aren't doing it without any funds.
We would not be able to do the full amount in 2020, but we would be able to put forth more money towards the JPA if needed.
And there was some discussion at the fire board, one of the Ramsey council members on the board did say, you know, what's the transition? You go from 40,000 to 165, that's 10% of our budget. So I think that there's some understanding there'd be a transition, we wouldn't be expected to pay the full amount.
Mr.
But
Mayor?
with that, Councilmember Rainville.
And I agree, I mean, they know that we've set our budget, you know, we, in good faith, put money to get back in as far as the building, which they believe needs improvements. I would like to say any conversations we have with them are the understanding that we don't get this bill, you know, we can transition into it, work our way up to the full vote, make good faith effort, and, without harming anyone.
All right? So do you want to accept a motion to that effect? So we're unified as a council?
Okay, this will be on the fly, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to have staff communicate back to Ramsey that we would wish to continue discussions on continuing the joint powers agreements to share fire services with the city of Ramsey.
Can I ask that to amend that to the relationship to adjust the joint powers agreement so it's equitable, understanding the cost that, because we'd still have to restructure trucks and the JPA, but, so I just don't want it construed that we want the JPA to continue as it is, but that we're interested and we know it's gonna cost more.
We have to rework we would be continuing to rework the JPA. Yeah.
Okay.
Does Lori have that?
And I think I saw Councilmember Blake making your second.
I will second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So Lori, you'll let them know and we'll see what they say at their meeting tomorrow. And we will know what their meeting results are before our next meeting in December.
Great.
All right. We have one last item on our special meeting.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
I would move, based upon staff's recommendation, that the city of Nowden contract with Scott Qualley, Minspect LLC for building services, building inspection services for the city of Nowden.
I will second that. A motion to second. Questions? And
Mr.
I'm not
Mayor,
checking I'm looking at Lori's email on my phone, so I'm not
Mr. Mayor,
checking.
how do we let the current inspection service be aware of
The
impending?
contract renewal is up right now for our current services. And so the communication will be, the council has decided to accept a different bid, and we will not be renewing the contract. So, I mean, that's when you submit a contract, it's up to the council, and so the option is always there before the council, so there isn't a presumption of it's gonna continue.
It's in line with the renewal.
That's why
The
staff
timing is appropriate.
investigated this and took the quotes to begin with, because it was renewal time. And so the contract is up for renewal. Our current vendor did submit a proposal in the form of a contract, and that's where the numbers on your spreadsheet are from. And then 3 other people were contacted, interviewed, and Lori made a recommendation based on those interviews on what would be best for the cities.
Sounds good.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
I do have one question, and it was part of my questions to Lori, and I do want to apologize to council for the email that I did. I was getting my eyes examined, so some of the typing was prior to having them dilated and some was after, so the worst part is after they were dilated, so hopefully you got the drift of my questions. But one of the questions I have is, so let's say I pulled a building permit to build a home, and I paid my full fee as of today, and as of whatever date it's going to be, only a portion of that fee has been worked on by the existing building official. It's say only 25% of my $1,000, I'm gonna take $1,000, so 250 of my $1,000 has actually been expended by the existing building official, but they've gotten a check for $1,000 from us. What happens to that 750? Do we get that back because they're not going to be doing anything more on it?
Mayor and council members, I think what we would need to do is talk to our current building official and have him close out all of the open permits that he currently has before moving on to the next. Any new building permits would go to the new building official. And the ones that are already in existence would be finished off, completed by the ones that have already been by our current.
Okay, so then
So is that-
it's,
Go ahead.
so then do I understand that as, then my construction project will not move over to the new
Correct.
inspector, it will stay with the existing, and they will expend the dollars of that?
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Because I don't want to pay the new ones for stuff the other one got the money for, and,
Right.
yeah, all right.
How long would a transition like that take? I mean, if something was started, how long could we still be expected to?
That's gonna
Getting
depend
built.
on the permit. If it's a new home, they may take a little longer. So we'll have to find out what we have open right now and which ones can be closed off quickly and which ones will take a little bit of time.
And so we talked about, if we made a decision tonight, that the chosen vendor could be invited to our council meeting to be introduced. When do you see the transition taking place? When does the new contract go into place?
Well, Mayor and council member, I think before knowing what open permits we have at this point, I would say we could bring him in for introduction in December with possibly a January start date.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
Looking at the proposed contract from the existing building official, now I don't know what the existing one says, but page 3, letter X, no, not X, 10, has the written notice 60 days unless there's a material breach. So I don't know what the existing contract states. So we might be
Do
looking
we
at
even
60.
have an existing contract?
I believe it was 30 days, but
Okay, well,
I
that's
will
our
check
benefit.
that.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Bryan.
Yeah, I sat down and talked about this with Lori, and it's a matter of there are more staff costs that need to be recouped, so we need an agreement that can help, cover those costs. And that the recommended contractor and its fees will work with, will be able to cover staff costs at the same time.
Yeah, the fees, and I think the other part of it, the services provided, that now we expect staff to do, this company will be doing. So I think there'll be fewer activities that your staff will need to do, and then a better fee structure for the residents as well. So yeah, we would need to see what the termination is on our existing arrangement. And I don't remember, I know when we first signed on with Rum River that we were gonna review in 6 months to see how it was working. I didn't remember actually signing a contract. So. But it must have, something must be there for you to be triggered that this is coming due. So you look at our current contract and let's structure it. So if we decide tonight, we give notice and is that, the expectation is that anything that Rum River started, they would finish?
That's what I would expect.
Because I know when we were interviewing MinSpec, they did say they would take anything open and put it into the electronic files for us. So I didn't know if they would, when we transitioned before, with Andy and the other building official left. I'm trying to remember if, they were separated, so did Andy pick up the open ones or not? So we would need that question answered. Who picks up what's open? Because I wouldn't want anybody disgruntled to be serving our residents if that were the case either, so. So you'll check on termination agreements and then the transition of how long we sit with the open ones versus going to the new ones. And Minspec said they could transition open things to the electronic files for us as part of this.
My understanding of that was that they would move our electronic files into their programs. I
Okay.
didn't understand it that they would complete unfinished permits,
Okay.
which I'm sure they would if we asked, but I think it would be best to complete them with our current building inspector.
Okay.
And I don't foresee any issues with that.
Okay.
They've always been professional.
All right, any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan.
I do at least would like to, thank Andy and Road River Consulting for their work, helping out the city, especially knowing that Andy has worked for the city in the past. So I at least wanted to go on record with that.
He's always been very professional, given us a lot of insight. So, yes, I agree, we appreciate, as he developed his own company and grew it, he has served us well. I also think, because I was part of the interview process, I agree with the clerk on the recommendation. Excited about some additional things that we can pick up here as well, so. But I commend Andy and his business as well, so. We do thank him, but we're growing in a different way at this point. Anything else before we adjourn?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Bryan,
motion to adjourn.
Second?
we are adjourned.